Hey friends, this is Jennifer Anderson with Uptown Common. Today we're talking about something that you may have never thought about before if you're new to markets. Or maybe you have thought about it before, but it's really not that exciting, it's pretty mundane, and so you just skip over it. And that is tent weights. If you do markets outside that require you to provide your own tent weights are not an option, even if the market organizer doesn't specifically list it as a requirement. It also helps to have a quality tent, which I'll talk about in another video later. And here's why. Weather folks generally consider light wind to be less than 12 miles an hour. Moderate wind is 13 to 30 miles an hour. Most tent companies will say with proper weight, their tents are okay in 35 to 40 mile an hour wind. But it's common to find lesser quality tents and tents without weight or without proper weight blowing away or collapsing in 15 to 20 mile an hour winds. So that explains why this could become an issue really quickly for you, even if it doesn't seem like strong winds. We all know weather is unpredictable, and sometimes strong storms pop up unexpectedly, or wind gusts come out of nowhere. It could just even be one. Or they're magnified by the buildings around you and create a wind tunnel type effect that will affect your booth setup. So it's really hard to simply look at your weather app or your news or whatever and figure out what type of wind you'll be dealing with. And here's the problem if you don't have proper tent weight. If your tent blows away, and we've watched this happen, I don't know, numerous times, it's very likely to at least damage your product and your tent. It could damage you in your booth if your product or your tent hit you. If a customer is in your booth, you're now risking their safety as well if they get hit with the product or your tent. And that's just what's happening in your own booth space. The next level is what about the people around you. So if your tent is flying through the air, it's likely to damage another vendor's tent, potentially even their product, them, the other vendor, or a customer in their booth. And you're responsible for all of that. So best case scenario, it's just your tent that's damaged. Worst case scenario, you're responsible for replacing somebody else's tent, paying for their damaged product, or medical bills for another vendor or a customer who's been injured by your stuff. If you're lucky and no one is hurt, other vendors weren't harmed, at the very, very least, you're responsible for replacing your broken tent and any product that was damaged, which is probably an expense that you hadn't planned on and could be a big deal depending on how much damage is caused and the price of the product that you sell. For us, we recommend using 45 pounds minimum per leg on your tent. We found that seems to balance safety and functionality pretty well. Even then though, we've had at least two instances I can think of where 45 pounds wasn't even enough. The wind was so strong that it was sliding the tent and the 180 pounds across the ground. And you can imagine what's happening to the displays and the products if they're not properly secured as well. And that's another video as well I'll do in the future. I have a story, we have a personal experience with this that I'm going to share that explains, I think, really well why you need to have properly weighted tent weights on your tent no matter what. When you see the pictures, when I remember seeing what happened, it was shocking. And when I see the pictures, it's still shocking. Wind is not something that's a joke. You really shouldn't mess around with it. This was last year in the summer 2022. We had to set up at a market the day before, and we knew there was a chance of a storm overnight. So we left our display pieces and our product piled in the center, still packed up. And we even chose to bungee some of our bigger display pieces to the tent itself to help hold it if there was wind, and to prevent it from falling and hurting our product or our tent or somebody else. And then we were going to come early the next day to set everything up. We arrived the next day and found out that our tents had collapsed overnight. They collapsed backwards. So apparently shortly after we left, there was a unexpectedly super strong storm that was compounded by wind tunneling through 2 buildings directly at our 2 tents. We were in an aisle by ourselves, and there was tents behind us, and there were, multiple rows after that. The wind collapsed our tents backwards. 5 of the 8 legs were snapped off. None of our product was damaged. The vendors' tents behind us were not damaged. None of their products was damaged. No person was injured by any of this happening. And interestingly, our tents had not moved. They were still in the same exact spot. They had just, the weights were holding it down exactly like they should have. It just pushed so it broke at the top, pushed the tents backwards. And no one else's stuff was damaged at all. Like, we were the only people who had collapsed tents. So apparently the wind hitting ours dissipated the strength enough that it was okay for the other vendors. And so who knew? Like, who knew that would happen? The good news is that our tent weights did exactly what they were supposed to do. Our product was mostly fine. Our neighbors' stuff was fine, no issue at all. We couldn't stay though, so we ended up losing 2 tents, 2 broken tents, and we lost out on 4 days of sales. This, at that time, was one of our top markets, which is a huge bummer. Our insurance replaced one of our tents, but it was too late to find another market to be at that same time. So we lost out on all those potential sales. We're still really grateful that the tent weights did what they should, and everything was pretty much okay. We just lost out those 2 tents and lost out on some sales. But the story does show the importance of having proper tent weights and why it's not something that you should just put on the back burner or put on lower priority, and because it's not as exciting. It could change everything for you. I'll post pictures of our broken tents in the comments. Let us know what you think. Let us know about your stories if you have any, and we'll talk to you later.